Okay, so welcome everyone. Hopefully I've got all this technology worked out so we can do a online meeting to record, and also some people may join us online, but also to welcome all of you here in person. So thank you for joining us for this Sierra Club educational meeting. My name is Carolyn Abram, and I'm currently the chair of the Mid-Missouri group of the Sierra Club, with 4 groups in Missouri as part of the World Sierra Club. And we're based here out of Columbia, but we support all of Missouri. And I wanted to, before we get to our featured speaker, who I know we're all eager to hear, I wanted to share a few of our upcoming activities. So up here on the slide, and all of these you can get more information on our website, on the Missouri Sierra Club website, which is mt.org/mo. And you can always find out events across the state. If you go to the Missouri website, they all automatically feed to them. And that's interesting if you want to do some outings that maybe we don't host here, but you can participate in outings that some of the other groups host. And some of the other groups do more backpacking, camping, and so if you're interested in those things, you might want to check that out. We also have Facebook pages. We're on Meetup and we're on Instagram, in addition to our website. So hopefully you can find us in all those places. So the first thing, a couple of things are coming up on Saturday. And the first one is we are working to remove invasive plants around the country. Last summer, we did a quarter-mile on the Bear Creek Trail that we adopted. This year, our team, since that's in good shape, and they finished it last summer and it didn't too much maintenance this year, they decided to work on glade restoration in the Gons Creek Recreation Area, which is a beautiful area that we're hoping to conserve more. So that's coming up on Saturday, June 14th, 9 a.m. to 11. And you can, if you get tired, you can leave. You don't have to work 2 hours. And if you don't feel like you can do chopping and sawing, there's always a need for somebody to stack the bush honeysuckle. So there's different jobs that you. And following that, there is the June 14th is a big protest rally day across the country because it's the day that President Trump has planned to have a military parade in Washington, D.C. And so across the country, over 1,900 events have been organized to mark No King's Day. We are doing one here in Columbia. There's also Mid-Missouri events in Boonville, Jefferson City, Fayette, Rolla, Marshall, and probably. So it's going to be at Boone County Courthouse Plaza. We do have a permit, so this is all legal. And there'll be plenty of room for everybody who comes. And as you know, if you've been to the Courthouse Plaza, we are going to have speakers. And then around 12:30, there's going to be a brief march. And you don't have to go on the march if you don't feel able. That's fine. Bring signs. There will be speakers. I will be one. I'll be focusing on the government action, federal government actions related to having negative impacts related to climate action, the environment, EPA, all those type of things. So that's coming up. We hope that you can join us. Then we have another really big project that we're working on with several allies. It's called Solarize Columbia. This is an effort to do a group buying program for solar and battery storage here in Columbia. So we've banded together with a company called Solar Crowdsource. Our other nonprofit partners are Renew Missouri, Legal and Mid-Missouri Peaceworks, Sierra Club. And we are doing this campaign. First step, of course, is to choose an authorized installer that will handle the installation for the campaign and give customers the confidence that we've done our due diligence and select a quality installer. And the bids for that are going to be due, I think it's Friday. So the installers are submitting bids, and then we'll be making a decision. Our big launch event is going to be July 10th at the Blue Electric Cooperative Community Room. And so if you're interested in buying solar, or if you've ever been interested in buying solar or battery storage for your home or your business or your church or any other facility that you have a relationship with, this would be a good time to at least come and check it out, because the more people that buy, the better the group buying discount. And you'll have until, the sooner you act, the better, of course, because then you might get your installation done this year. but you'll have until October 31st just to say that you're interested, and then there'll be some time after that to actually sign contracts, and then the installations will happen. So, so that is something that's working. We also could still use a few more volunteers to be on the working committee. We're trying to create a low middle income aspect to the campaign where we would do some fundraising and maybe some houses for qualifying applicants. And that is something that we still, we haven't dug into yet because we're working on getting the overall program going. So if anyone's interested in working on that, we'd have some more help. Okay, so then, and also if you would like to, you can go ahead and sign up to, have someone contact you, have the installer contact you actually about a bid when we get that program going. There's a sign up sheet in the back labeled Solarize Columbia. And if you want to go ahead and sign up now, you can go to the website and sign up, or of course you can come to the every month now, the people at the Missouri chapter level hold a statewide meeting via online that is to help new members get acclimated to the club and learn what we're doing across the state, and then also to help existing members collaborate on activities. So that's coming up on June 25th. They call it the Missouri Monthly Sierra Club Space, or MOS for short. And then we have the executive committee for our Mid-Missouri group meets every second Monday. And anyone is welcome to attend those meetings. All that I ask, I chair those. And all that I ask is that if you have something that you want discussed, that you, I'd appreciate if you contact me. Agenda, and you can do that through either my personal email or your email. And those are held by Zoom every second month. And then we can still use more volunteers for our, we've got some new people, great, we appreciate them, but we can always use more people for the political committee. The next thing that we'll be working on is the Ward 2 City Council race. It's going to be a special election in August. So we've got our candidates now. We're just starting the endorsement process right now to determine if we're and that's what the political other activities potentially help the candidates that we endorse get elected. Then we're going to be working the Ashland Pride event. If anyone is interested in helping with cabling at that event, you can chat to me. And also, we always need more help with social media. We've got different people who are working different tools, but if you can do Facebook or any of those social media tools that you really want to get in an element for a half hour or more to help post things, because it does take a long time to cycle through all the tools that we have now to communicate with different people. So, for example, I know a lot of people migrated from Facebook to Blue Sky, and we aren't over there yet. So, and if you have something else that you would like to help with, we're always open, to new activities. We're volunteer-led, volunteer-driven. So what we work on is what volunteers are interested in. So if we're not working on something that you, then it's always something that you have an interest in. You want to try to get some other people to have an interest in. So, so those are our activities. If you have any questions about that, I'll be around for the meeting. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jan Dye, who is a member of our executive committee and treasurer, and she's going to introduce us.
Oh, I'm going to turn over the paper, so I'm going to read this. So welcome to tonight's program called Eco Anxiety and How to Cope in a Time of Climate Crisis. We have with us Claire Keeler, it's right here. She's an ecotherapist who's been practicing as a licensed professional counselor for the better part of the decade. Part of Claire's practice is in the area of anxiety and grief, specifically around the area of climate shift. Particularly for those of us who have been immersed in this issue, who follow the science and understand the huge implications of climate change, we are anxious, sad, and full of grief for the planet and every creature that lives on it, and particularly now as environmental protections are being rolled back. I've been struggling, as I'm sure many of you are too. Please welcome Claire Keeler.
In just 1 second, I'll have this. I hope. No, we can turn it off, I think. I gotta still have to share, so all this technology is. I'm hoping I know how to do it. Okay, that's not the slideshow. Close that one. It's confusing me. Oh, where'd yours go? I didn't.
You closed it too. I can't when I wrote it.
All right, I still hear. I got it. Okay, now I'm going to share. Then I'm going to start the slideshow. See if that works better. Last time we did this, we couldn't see the slides as they were advancing, so I want to be sure we do it right today. All right, excellent.
All right, I'm gonna leave my water there so I don't spill it on the computer. So hi, my name is Claire. I'm a nature-based cultural trauma therapist. And if any of you are wondering what that actually means, like some of the introduction covered it, but my BA is in philosophy, and so that gives me license to read really long sentences. And so I've tried to make it very succinct describing my job, but it's basically deepening relationship and awareness of both the natural world and the myriad systemic troubles and traumas of our time, including societal racism, sexism, speciesism, nationalism, classism, heterosexism, transphobia, ableism, capitalism, colonial histories of violence, and cultural loss. And looking at how these things are intersecting with the daily lived experience and lives of my clients. So it's a little bit of a departure from the norm. Space part works. Great. So climate anxiety, I chose a slightly different title. So building capacity and deepening connections with a world we can't escape. I'm going to say I usually have more than an hour to lay a foundation and introduce some skills with clients. So this is a kind of a packed presentation. I'm going to work to speak slowly. I'm bringing some other resources that I'll name into it if you're wanting to find other places to look for information than me. But I'm also happy after we're done with this room to hang out if any of you have questions. So what is anxiety? So one of my favorite things to do is to look into etymology and the etymology of words. And part of the reason is because with etymology, you get a lot of clues about what our ancestors were talking about. We get a lot of clues about actual history and what we're really saying. So when we say anxiety, if we look at the Proto-Indo-European root of that word, it is ang. And it is the same root for words like anger, anguish, hangnail, angina, right? And a lot of others, like most of the ang words, right? And it's a way, so when we look at just what ang meant, tight, painfully constricted, or painful. Part of why I think it's important to be looking at what anxiety is when we talk about something like climate anxiety is because when we start looking into Western psychological perspectives, the way the DSM, which diagnoses anxiety, talks about it, is an excessive worry and apprehensive expectations occurring more days than not for at least 6 months about a number of events or activities such as work or school performance. The main thing I want us to focus on there is the word excessive. So part of why I called this working with a planet we can't escape is because when the planet is literally on fire, it's not excessive to be worried. And so I just want to say that what we're experiencing, and I'll use the word trauma a lot with anxiety. They're not related in terms of actual diagnoses, but the ways that I'm using them there, I'll get to that. But it's just to say, this isn't excessive worry. This is a normal biological reaction any animal would have to being trapped. So I don't like thinking of the planet as a trap. But there's a few things I want to talk about just in terms of the background of understanding how we exist as humans. And so in this library, I hope still there is a book by a fellow named Matt Lieberman. It is called Social. I used to use it to teach a class on community stewardship at MU. In that book, he talks about basically our social wiring. And he was, I think, years ahead of his time because he was making an argument in there that we should flip Maslow's hierarchy on its head. And so he was saying that basically instead of putting the self-actualized individual at the top, which is highly individualistic, flip it over, right? And not just looking at our physical needs, having shelter, but he's arguing that social needs are actually the most important thing for social animals. And we're all social animals, but we don't always think about what that means. Two of my favorite examples from this book, I talk with clients about this a lot. One is cyberball. So in the cyberball experiment, basically a participant comes in and they're hooked up to an EEG that's going to measure what is going on in their brain activity. They're faced with a computer, kind of like the one I'm looking at now. And the researchers are saying, okay, there's 3 stick figures on this computer. 2 of them are playing catch. That's 2 other participants. They're in another room. And what you're going to do, you're going to hit the space bar, you're going to join the game of cyberball. We're just going to measure the way that you're making decisions when you're playing catch. And the guy's like, great, hits the space bar, joins the game of catch. One little stick figure passes the ball to his stick figure. There's a version of this you could find online and play yourself if you wanted to. Also, at some point, it might be gone now. But it's actually a lie, right? Because researchers are sneaky. And so it's a computer program. There aren't other participants. And the program is programmed to exclude the person who's hooked up. So there's a point where those other 2 stick figures, they just start passing the ball back and forth. And what they're really measuring is what happens in the human brain when we feel rejection. And so one of the things that happens in the human brain when we feel rejection is the same part of the brain that becomes active when we experience physical pain, becomes activated when we experience what he's calling social pain, right? Other regions of the brain that become active are the limbic areas that are related to memory and emotion. And it's just a way of saying social pain is sticky, right? Like if I asked my stepsister, tell me about the time my brother jumped on your arm and broke it in the pool and it was horrible for the rest of the summer. And she'd basically say something like that. He was trying to splash me. He missed. He hit my arm. It sucked. It was itchy. There was a cast. I couldn't get it wet. It was horrible, right? Physical pain. If I said, tell me about the first time you remember somebody excluding you from a conversation, right? A version of not passing the ball. It's going to be a longer story. And when we think about that for ourselves, the first time I got left out, right? It's more powerful. And bear in mind, in cyberball, this was happening. It was pain related to 2 stick figures in a game of catch I didn't know I cared about 10 minutes prior, right? And we still experience it as pain. And so social pain, without connection, we feel pain. Connect, you pass me the ball. Disconnect, you don't pass me the ball. Fairness Tastes Like Chocolate is literally the name of one of the other chapters in that book. He goes through a lot of different research, but the one that really stood out to me is that there were 2 folks, once again, sat down with the computer. The computer is going to dole out $100, like randomly in tens to either one of those. So it might be 90 to 1, 10 to the other, 80, 20, something like that. And they both agree to play the first round. But after the first round, both parties have to agree to play again. So let's say it's 90-10. If I get 90, I could just leave. What was interesting about this is that a statistically significant number of people, so not all the people, but about 70% or more of the people, actually would agree to play again, even if it was risking their own detriment. What was even more interesting, because they had these people hooked up to see what was going on in their brains as well, is that when people lost money at their own detriment, they actually had a pleasure reward oxytocin response if they perceived it as being more fair. The closer it was to 50-50, the happier we were as like statistically significant number of people. In this country, it's hard to get everybody on board with that. A lot of capitalists, right? But overall, what we actually want is fairness. And when we think about going back to connect and disconnect, when we see injustice, it's disconnect, right? A lot of that going around these days. When we see something really wonderful taking place, connection between people, we see people sharing, we feel good. We get an oxytocin pleasure response, right? So fairness tastes like chocolate. But it's just to say, in our social wiring, we need connection. So what do we do with angst? I have this slide here just to say, what does our culture teach us to do with our discomfort? And I'm going to say it's based, the 3 things I have here are based on the things that I experience a lot as a counselor. So I have folks coming in, they're expecting me to tell them to meditate. They're expecting, I can't actually prescribe medication, but sometimes they're expecting that also. And I want to point out that word med, the Proto-Indo-European root of the word med, means to take appropriate measures. The thing that I notice about meditation and about medication is that it puts a whole lot of emphasis on the individual client in front of me. So if somebody comes in and says, I'm really scared about the world ending, And I say, have you heard of mindfulness? Right? Can you just go meditate? There's a way in which I might be helping them address maybe something inside of them, but I'm not really addressing what's going on globally. So it's kind of a miss. And I'd say it's not always taking appropriate measures. I don't want to totally pick on meditation. I'm a really big fan, but I do want to say there's a cognitive sort of focus in the way that mindfulness and meditation happen in this country. I lived in China for about 7 years and got to study Buddhism and a bunch of stuff. And so I'm going to say the way the West appropriated meditation, put it all in the, not really in the mind, because the mind is in your whole body, is what neuroscience shows us, but it put it into cognition. And so people think that what it means is they need to have no thoughts or they need to be very calm. And the point of meditation is actually to be regulated, which is a term we use a lot in counseling, and people hear about self-regulation a lot. Regulated does not mean calm. It does not mean I'm flat. It does not mean I'm zen. Regulation is referring to where I am in my nervous system spectrum. And so I can have stress, because stress and trauma are both part of the same system, nervous system spectrum. Regulated means even if I'm stressed, like right now, feeling a little bit nervous, but I'm not tipping into fight or flight. I'm not curled into a fetal position on the floor. I'm not ready to punch you all. I'm not running out of the room, right? There's a certain amount of stress that I can manage. And so I'm saying nervous, but regulated. Regulated can mean I'm managing and navigating what's going on in front of me. I'm not tipping over the edge into deep panic, into what we'll call trauma or anxiety that's so big I can't think straight, right? So just to know, meditation is supposed to help with regulation. I don't want to pick on medication too much. It does tend to help a lot of people navigate. But again, just going back to that, do we feel like we're taking appropriate measures? If somebody comes to me and says, I'm really scared about what's going on in the planet, or I'm really scared about what's going on in this country, and I say, have you heard of medication? Right? There's a way in which we're just kind of bypassing the issue there. The other thing that I see the most is identify and eliminate the cause. That's kind of what we're taught in this society. We're very rationalistic. I'm going to get to that in a minute. But so we're very much into a problem-solving brain. And so there's a way in which most of the folks that I talk to, they're coming in, I'm like, so what do you do when you have anxiety, right? And so let's say my husband comes home angry from work and it makes me really nervous and anxious. And so I told him to stop it. Right? What I've actually just done is I've not made room for him to have his emotional process for whatever's going on at work. I've also bypassed dealing with my emotional process. But the bigger problem with identify and eliminate the cause is because, well, let's identify the cause of climate anxiety, climate change. Could any of you eliminate it? Yeah, so it's not the most helpful thing. And what I want to point out about what a lot of Western psychology is actually doing is that it's traditionally, it's changing right now, but traditionally put most of the onus onto the individual to navigate an emotional experience, usually not even that emotional, sort of a cognitive behavioral, mental behavioral experience, without really addressing what else is going on. And so that brings me to this slide, which has a couple different points: as above, so below. That's a phrase that I hear a lot from a lot of pagans, I think. For me, it's just a way of saying patterns repeat at every level. The way that moss organizes itself on a rock is the same way that trees organize themselves on a mountain. There are patterns that are being followed. They're followed on the molecular layers. They're followed into the wide open layers that we can actually observe with our 5 senses. And there's a similar thing that's going on culturally, whether I'm talking about the culture of how I deal with my emotionality or the culture that I actually live in. So you'll hear me say this a lot, the as above, so below. So there's this way in which patterns are repeating. I think it's also important just to notice like what a self is. So we come from a society that just kind of teaches us that basically I'm an amalgamation of the things that happened to me through my childhood and pretty much all the way up to now, and the things that are happening around me to some extent. What are the major contributors in my environment and my genetics, right? And so an intersectionality really blows that out of the water. Intersectionality is recognizing that the self is actually a plurality of things, that you have a gut biome in your stomach that affects your mood, and that gut biome is not you. It's made of bacteria that has its own existence and has colonized you, right? You also have like a neural processing center in your heart that fires faster than your brain, right? So there's a lot of funny places where we can't quite put self, but especially with intersectionality, the main thing I want to point to with that is that we are constantly being intersected by each other and by our environments, right? Like if I suddenly started yelling at you all, it would be a really different talk. right? If one of you started yelling at me, that's going to change my day. I love October. When my clients start coming in and they're just like, oh, I'm feeling really sad. I'm feeling less motivated. I have less energy. I'm just down. And I'm like, yeah, it's called fall. Every single one of you is experiencing right now. The entire season is coming down. So are the leaves. A lot of stuff is dying. There's a great story about it. It's called Persephone. Right? So we're going to the underworld. And there's a way in which we've evolved out of and with, and we're not really away from it. We're still fully connected to a world that exists in cycles. And these are cycles of production and decay, right? And so it's not a linear existence, but we live in a world that asks us, like, even if we go back to that definition from the DSM, that it was about interrupting performance, such as at work or school. And we're taught that we have to have this linear performance. We're taught that professionalism is me being the same every single day, no matter what is going on in the office, what is going on around me, what is going on in the government, how much of my funding is being cut, or what is going on in my personal life or inside of me. The idea that I'm going to wake up and be the same person every day is absurd. It's impossible. It's a production line, right? And so to actually be able to move through our cycles, we have to be able to actually recognize that we are more than just a linear self, but we're also being intersected by all kinds of cycles. Like, we walked into the room today and I was like, this is so pretty. It's so much better than the gray fluorescent thing I was picturing, because we know even just color changes how we feel. So we're not a fixed thing. And that's what intersectionality is referring to. I'm going to keep an eye on my time. I can talk a lot. So I wanted to ask the question of, like, so what are we being intersected with? And a metaphor that I use for a lot of my clients, especially these days, is like, we're going to think of ourselves as fish in a fishbowl, right? And right now what's going on is somebody is shaking the aquarium, right? That's what it feels like to be alive right now. And a lot of us, more than 50% of us probably statistically, have also grown up with other fish who like slap us in the face with their fins, who like blow bubbles at us. We've grown up with difficulty from other fish. And so there's just this constant kind of agitation, right? And I'm not going to spend as much time as I would like to on this slide. I'm going to say that everything that I would want to say about this slide, you could find online. There's a podcast called This Book on Fire. And there's a book, they love unpacking heady books. And the heady book they unpack is by Sylvia Federici. It is called Caliban and the Witch. She published it, I think, in 1977. And she was, I believe, like, she was definitely a feminist, but also like Marxist socialism. But she was kind of like, hey, Marx and Foucault, you guys kind of left the gender gap completely out of your analysis of capitalism and how it came to be. And in order to have capitalism, we had to oppress women, and not just women. We had to create a lot of other kinds of oppressions. And when I say we, the history of this, which took place across centuries through most of Europe, the we is the aristocracy, sometimes the church, the bourgeoisie, and the monarchs. But there is a concerted effort to create divisiveness between us, the plebes, and it's still going on. And so understanding what the fishbowl is understanding very much what is going on in this screen. And I say it's a great book to have a reading group with, because it's some really hard stuff. Because in order to, like, the witch trials were about creating capitalism. And as the witch trials were going on, there were all kinds of massacres. There were towns being wiped out. There were homes being burned down. There were lots and lots of people who were dying while they were trying to stop what was called enclosure. And enclosure was the destruction of the commons. Enclosure is when they created private property and said, you can no longer hunt here. You can no longer grow your food here. You can no longer subsist here. You can come over here and pay for it from this guy. But if you come into this forest, it's mine. I'm going to shoot you, which is a thing that happened a lot. And that's in all of our intergenerational trauma histories. And that's a thing that also still has a way of happening. There is a point where private property didn't exist the way that it does now. And that was a traumatic going through. Part of how they did that, I'm just going to talk rationalism, materialism. So my BA is in philosophy. I'm just going to say very quickly, rationalism is basically Descartes, cogito ergo sum. He said, I think, therefore I am. Cognition is the main provable piece of existence. It's the only thing that matters. Rationalism, if you're in any intro philosophy class, is pitted against empiricism, which is like Hume and Locke, and a lot more interesting people these days, but who are saying actually our lived experience, our sensual experience, our embodied experience, our emotional experience matters. Rationalism says your emotions are irrational and therefore not important. Your intuition does not exist. Your body is base and sinful, so don't pay too much attention to it. You just need to be rational. But a lot of the famous old dead white philosophers, such as Immanuel Kant, also said women can't be rational. We can't be moral because we don't have reason, right? And I just want to point out, I like to pick on Descartes a lot. He was a vivisectionist. He believed that animals don't feel pain. He believed that they were just mechanical. A vivisectionist dissects the animal while it's still living. So, and he even dissected a horse in his own living room. So we're talking about a sociopathic animal torturer. We've just banked rationalism, not just on, but that's where it was coming from. At around the same set of centuries, so we're kind of going 14th, 15th on up to now. We also have Francis Bacon coming along, building off of something that the Greeks said, into materialism. Materialism was the idea that everything arises from matter, from the material of the earth. I do want to say the word Mater in German. Matter means mother, and it has a lot to do with earth. But he was actually de-animating that idea. He was mechanizing it. He was saying, along with Descartes, because all of this is object and I'm the only subject because we're the only ones who have reason, therefore we can exploit and use the materials. This is where resources, heavy air quotes with that word, got started. And so what was taking place at this time also with heavy help from the church was the de-animizing of our histories, the de-animistic aspect. All of us have cultural histories for 99% of human, the 100,000 years of human existence that were deeply connected with nature and that believed the natural world was huge life world, was highly influential, was teaching, was speaking, was singing. And it does these things literally, but these days you can throw a walk down the street and hit anybody who's like, there's no sentience there, there's no language there, there's no intelligence there, and science keeps proving it wrong. Science proves it a little too slowly, but this is where we got speciesism. This is how individualism comes in, right? That there's a way that I get to be the most important thing. This was all to create capitalism, right? To create a kind of productivity. Anything that ends in ism, it's good to be suspicious. I'm just gonna say, right? And I'm not gonna go all the way through patriarchy and the gender divisions. Like I think I've said enough on that, but I do want to talk about I'm better in one way. I have a very fantastic teacher that I used to study with for about 7 years. His name is Martín Prechtel. He has amazing books. If you want to know more about this stuff, his books are a wild ride, but The Smell of Rain on Dust is his book about grief. It's not that big. It's wonderful. It does feel a little bit like getting kicked in the ass. So I'm much nicer than him, but he's much more eloquent. His name is Martín Prechtel, Prechtel. Martín Prechtel, The Smell of Rain on Dust. He also has, I forget what he calls it, but you can sign up to kind of sit at his feet and listen to his stories. It's an ongoing thing that he does across Zoom, and he records it. And then when you've paid, you get to keep those recordings and still listen to them for the next 6 months. And so I've never learned so much from anybody, and I've never met anybody who knows so many languages, so much about history, so many musical instruments. He can make his own clothes. He can do any kind of indigenosity genius, right? And that's his background. He's not modern like we are. So he grew up Pueblo Quieres and then Sutitlamayan. Anyway, one of the things that he taught me about was what he called one way. I still remember him standing in front of the class and saying, it doesn't matter which way the nail bends, left or right. It's still the same violence. And he's talking about a kind of violence that indigenous folks across the world, including our own ancestors, have known about, written about. It's in all mythologies and all cultures. That is the one real problem with humans, right? I love reading mythology. I love reading old creation stories, and there's a lot of stinky human stories, especially in the Southwest tribes. But this thing that I'm calling I'm Better, and I'm borrowing that from Tyson Yunkaporta, who is a fellow that's indigenous to the areas of Australia. And he has a wonderful book on Spotify called Sand Talk. And what he's saying is basically like, I'm better is the part of us that decides that I need to put myself above. It's creating a hierarchy of domination, which we use rationalism, materialism to do that, right? And so it's the way of saying my way is the best way. And it's a really sneaky thing that's colonized all of us, even in this room, right? Like I run into it in myself plenty. I run into it like any place there's a judgment where I'm putting myself above. But I run into it a lot in the healing community where people are like, well, she really hasn't done her trauma work. And since she hasn't done her trauma work, that's why she's just all triggered and messed up and doesn't actually know that I'm right. I'm better. And what does she need to do? Her trauma work. Who decided that? Me. Why? Because that's my way. Every way needs to be my way. This is the setup for narcissism and also for US foreign policy and domestic policy lately. So, but it's a thing to be looking out for, thing to know about. Okay, I want to take a breath. And I want to ask all of you to take a breath as well. And I'm going to invite you. So I have these things I like to give clients that are kind of like quick hacks, right? And so if everybody would just do jazz hands with me for a minute, like just some jazz hands. If you want to stand up, go for it. I'm not going to make you, right? But just shake your hands, you know, shake your body a little if you want to, and just notice how you feel. And like take a big breath in and just breathe out. And just notice if it feels any different than it felt a minute ago while I was talking about the cultural annihilation of all of our ancestral ways in the world and what's going on now. So does it feel any different? A little different? Yeah. So one of the things that we actually need to do, I love the word emotion because most of it is motion. And this is like somatic is now the buzzword. Soma means body. It's working with trauma through the body. But what emotions want to do is move. And so one of my favorite moments as a counselor, I found my cats. I came around the corner. This is when they are outside cats. I don't do that anymore because birds. But they'd caught a dragonfly and they didn't know what they had. They both looked up like, you know, and I picked up this dragonfly, this beautiful green emerald dragonfly. And I had this big flowering petunia and I just set him on it. And I got so excited as a counselor because he immediately started to vibrate his wings, right? And what he was doing is he was vibrating out the part of him that was like, I'm gonna die. That has to go somewhere. If we don't let that shake out of us, then it just goes off like it's in a bomb, but it stays in our body, right? And so even EMTs at this point in time have been trained when people after an accident, you know, your adrenaline spikes and how your body's just shaking. Let it. When you let your body shake, you'll have less problems with whiplash. You have less problems with those kinds of injuries because your body's doing the thing it's biologically made to do. It looks weird according to this culture, but we've already agreed, I think, that this one's pretty messed up. So it's good to start shaking. With the breath, and I'm going to have you all do it with me one more time. To just take a breath in any old way you want to, but when you breathe out really slowly through your mouth. So what we're doing right there, when we're breathing in, you're activating your sympathetic nervous system. And when you're breathing out, you're activating the parasympathetic nervous system. And this is basically the yin and yang of the body. Breathing in is activating to the nervous system. Breathing out is deactivating. It moves us towards ease. And so I have a lot of clients who've been traumatized by breath work. And so I just teach them this one because you can breathe in any way you want and you just breathe out slow. And if your out breath is longer, then you're helping your body move towards ease. Another great little hack, you might see me do this a lot. This relaxes the fascia around your heart and it allows your blood to start moving, oxygen to start moving, just moves your body towards ease. Gently rocking while you're doing it. Right now we're in the space of what we do with infants, right? Pretty cool. So, and it's the kind of thing you can do at a meeting or like a PowerPoint presentation or someplace you're nervous, like I'm gonna try to pretend to concentrate. You look really interested. You're just wrapped with attention and just, you don't even know you're rocking. But what you're actually doing is self-regulating. So it's a wonderful little cheat. And I like to mention those things. But so part of why I want to take a breath is because it's a hard thing thinking about what happens if the examples we have to follow in our lives are already organized against our best interests. Because we are living in a fishbowl that's largely organized against our best interests. And we have a government that doesn't want to talk about it. We have so-called higher education that doesn't want to teach it. And so you kind of have to go and find what it actually means to be a human being because it doesn't mean to be a worker, even though that's what we ask our children. What do you want to be when you grow up? And we mean what job, right? I'm like, I wanted to be a dolphin. Nobody took that seriously. I still want to be a dolphin. So nobody took that seriously. But so moving on, we can get into the curious and surprising work of remembering, right? And I want to just pay attention to the word remember, because I recently got to, like a few weeks ago, I got to see Wall-Kimmerer give a talk at an herbal conference that I went to, and it was so lovely that when she was talking about this word, she said to belong to again, and I was like, that's what I say. For a moment, I was as cool as Wall-Kimmerer. Right? But to think of it as to be a member of something, to belong to again. Martín Prechtel, when he talks about remembering, he talks about literally putting the body of the goddess back together again, right? And, you know, even if you're not into like goddess speak, let's talk about Gilgamesh, which is the first written record, right, of a story that we have. And what happens in Gilgamesh, right? You have this guy who fights with everything that he sees, and he makes friends with this fellow Enkidu, who's actually the enslaved wild, is the way to read that. And I get a lot of this from Martín. He gets mad when people don't give him credit. I learned a lot about Gilgamesh from Martín Prechtel. Moving on, right? But so what does Gilgamesh do? He ultimately goes to the sacred cedar grove to fight the so-called monster Humbawa. Humbawa is the holy in nature. It is a known thing in a lot of older mythologies and indigenous cultures that are still alive today that when you face the holy in nature, it looks monstrous to you. Just like when nature faces us, like imagine an apple walking into the kitchen, right? We look really scary. We look like the witch out of Hansel and Gretel, right? So I'm here to cook you. Thanks for coming, pot roast, right? But so just he goes into the cedar grove. He murders the holy in nature. He cuts down the entire cedar grove and he turns it into this big door. And he and Enkidu, Humbawa curses the heck out of them before he dies, which is an important piece of it. But they take this door, which is the symbolic etching of all of these things that used to be the deep connection to the world, right? There's a little of this in the Garden of Eden stories too. We're not going to go too far into that, right? But the thing it says at the very beginning of Gilgamesh, it starts talking about a cedar box. And it's the very intro. And what it's saying is, you're going to forget this box. You're going to forget this story. This story is older than you. This story's been around for a really long time. And you don't even have to remember because it's still going to come back and live you. And it's where we are now. Trump is Gilgamesh, right? We're in a period of time right now where there are still people marching into the most sacred spaces and killing the holy and taking all the rewards, right? And they fight with everything they see. Right. And so knowing it helps to look backwards in the history, right? Thinking about Gilgamesh, this remembering piece. Another thing I want to say with the word remember, that root, smer, right, is the same root for the word mourn. To mourn means to remember. If you read The Smell of Rain on Dust, you'll learn that grief means praise. So when we talk about what we're doing when we're grieving what we're losing, while there is absolutely sorrow and grief, there's like 16,000 emotions in grief, right? Sorrow is a part of it, but to be able to remember, to mourn and grieve, to remember with praise is a really important part of what we're supposed to be up to right now, right? And it's hard. Nobody I know wakes up and says, I am so excited. I'm going to grieve the losses of the planet today. It's going to be so fun. Nobody does that. Right. But in this, how do we stop attacking on? How do we stop Gilgameshing our reality and one another? Right. I have 3 different slides that all kind of say the same thing, but they're about different layers of intersections here. So healthy relating heals. The number one thing that heals trauma is healthy relationships. And it doesn't have to be healthy relationships with humans. Those are a little harder to come by these days, depending on who you're around. Right. But one of the first things we can do is rekindle what we've lost by deepening connection with the outer landscape. When I talk outer landscape, I mean the big holy in nature. I mean nature. And so one of the things that I'm often asking my clients to do or doing with my clients for the ones who want to meet me outdoors and on trails is to listen to the land and listen to other languages. And when I say other languages, I mean that we all on some level know that winter speaks a different tongue than spring. And that is a different sound than fall, right? We know also, like I know that chickadees are wildly curious. They're very courageous. I know that cuckoos will hide from you the whole time you're trying to look at them, right? That like there's just constantly, and they feel your eyes coming, right? There's different language there. Plants also speak a language. Listening to plants is a lot like learning to listen to your own heart. It's really subtle, right? But you can start with just what it feels like to notice, right? Like the language of chamomile in my yard right now is just bright, shiny, happy flowers. They make me really happy. And it feels different intersecting with me than when I see the valerian. Those are also nice flowers, big and white, right? But valerian has a different feel. And it's funny because chamomile, like they both have a similar kind of thing going on medicinally, right? But there's a cheery kind of aspect to chamomile. There's a way that it also speaks to mood medicinally. Whereas valerian is like, I'm just here to kind of put you down. So make you go to sleep, But so listening to the language, learning, and this is sort of listening to body at the same time. But because I work with trauma, I really encourage clients to be listening to their senses away from them. The body can often feel like a very dangerous place to be and to pay attention to, but it's the same muscle, whether I'm listening out or listening in. And I'm going to say caring about what other species say. So another example, and this is also example of listening, but caring. I was on the trail a couple of days ago, 2 different times, same trail with 2 different clients. And there's this doe who's just mowing down the jewelweed and the nettles out there. And she's not shy of people. But when we see her, I love my clients, we always stop. And she just keeps going, and we get a little closer and she just keeps going. And we know that if we keep talking like 2 people having a conversation, when we get up to her, she's going to bolt. And without really having to say too much about it, we slow our gait. We're not making a lot of direct eye contact. We're just keeping a little bit of peripheral edge, because if she lifts a leg, she's speaking. That's her language. It means back up, right? Martín says if they put that foot down, they shoot an arrow through you and it takes a year off your life. So be careful about that, right? But I know, okay, too close. If I want to actually respect her, if I want to care about what she is saying, and she's saying, don't interrupt my meal, this is my home, then I'm going to be careful about how I move. Learning to do that with birds, learning to do that with rabbits, learning to do that with possums. We have so much wildlife here to learn to do that with, right? But it's that I'm going to pay attention to the thing that's happening. I'm not going to expect you to read my mind or speak English to me. And I'm going to care about what you're showing me with your body. I'm going to care about what you're showing me for plants and trees with your growth cycle, with your nature, with your essential nature. All right. And the last thing I want to say, and these are all ways of relating, of getting into relationship. And I forgot to say this at the beginning. When you're in relationship with nature, I was talking about self-regulation before. Nature is co-regulating. Nature will help you regulate with or without your consent. It's way more powerful with your consent, but there's mountains of research at this point in time that show that you can just sit in a natural area, and it can be a park. It doesn't have to be the wilderness. It can't be a football field, but just a park for 30 minutes, and you're going to gain all the same benefits of a meditation. It has all the same benefits as mindfulness. Your cortisol is going to go down, your muscle tension is going to go down, your focus is going to improve, your recall is going to improve, your heart rate variability is going to improve, your breath is going to become more normative. It's going to do so many great things for your body. And it's because your body unconscious is already interacting with that world. It's the conscious mind that's been taught that's an object, that's scenery, because I'm the subject, the most important thing in the room, the rationalist here. It's because we've grown up in that we don't know our bodies are actually still participating with the life world. But if we actually get into beginning to participate, it becomes even more powerful. But even without your consent, nature will help you regulate. And I like using the word correlation instead of co-regulation, but it's a wonderful way to deal with anxiety. It's also a wonderful way to deal with grief, right? If I actually bring myself to the water when I'm sad, if I feel like I'm full of crap, if I bring myself to the streams that are in downtown, right? And I can just be like, I see you doing this too. She's full of crap, right? And still a stream, still doing something, still in its essential nature. I keep using the word essential nature, and I just want to give a little more homage to Martín. He said this thing that I loved once, because from rational material background, people are always talking about what makes us the most important species, and we're not, right? But there's all of these arguments about what we have that all the other species don't. And Martín said once, the only thing that makes us different from other species, the only thing, is that we can turn away from our essential nature. We're the only species that can do that. We can abandon our essential nature. And the fact that we have folks like Richard Louv writing books like Last Child in the Woods, right? The fact that we're in the situation that we are right now, I think really affirms our ability to turn away from our essential nature, because going back to connect, our essential nature is to connect. Our brains still know it. We still experience disconnect as pain, right? So beginning to move back into essential nature, connecting with the thing that already knows how to connect, which is land. Healthy relating still heals, as above, so below. Told you guys that was going to come back. So this is deepening connection with our inner landscapes. Everything I just said about that slide applies to this one, but here what I'm talking about is the way that we regard what's going on internally. Because rationalism has taught us that emotions don't matter. And society has taught us that anything is bad. I have so many clients, they're always like, well, I'm not angry. I was just frustrated. Right. I wasn't angry. I was feeling a little impatient. I was just a little irritated. Right. And it's like, you're angry. Right. And usually when we get angry, we're already trying to talk ourselves out of it, or we're trying to identify the problem and eliminate it. But there's a way, same with anxiety, where we're telling our body, stop that, stop that, stop that. Right. We're trying to exile an emotion. And it's so different if we actually begin to learn to ask that feeling what it means. If we begin to turn attention inwards and be like, this is where meditation, mindfulness is really great. You know, where it's sort of like, whoa, I did this once while driving. I'm kind of an angry driver. And I was like stuck on a road where the speed limit is 50, but this guy in front of me was going 35, and there's all these students flying past me, right? And I was like, I'm gonna stay in the lane and determine where the urge to pass is coming from, right? And it was like, I put the turn signal on 3 different times. Like, no, what is going on? I've decided to be here. Why am I so angry? What is anger? But like I was still driving, but beginning to listen in, I actually realized I was afraid. I love driving. I don't think of myself as afraid when driving. So that's why it took me a few minutes of listening to figure out like, oh, this is what my body feels like when it's in a fear response. And of course it's in a fear response. Somebody's going to hit me by behind. This guy's holding traffic up and these kids don't even know how to drive. It's like, it's time to flee. We get out of there, right? Which is what my body wanted to do. Fight, right? It's instinct. And my conscious mind was trying to override it, right? Which is what we usually do with our emotions. And so learning to actually take a little time to listen in, just begin listening first, right? So listening to this other language, and every emotion has a different language, right? And that thing about caring what other species say, caring what your emotions are saying. Anger is often setting a boundary. It's letting you know that something is not fair, something has hurt, right? It's usually, or something is scary. It's usually one of those. Right. And those are important things to know in this world, because we have to know that kind of stuff to protect ourselves. But if we're shutting anger down, we don't get to know it. And so I have the words healing means whole right here. Proto-Indo-European root of the word heal, which is kailo, means whole. So in order to heal, it doesn't mean we evict parts of ourselves. It doesn't mean we get rid of things. It means that we're actually needing to remember, belong to again, and put back together the entire experience of what it is to be a human being. To be a human being is to have all of the emotions, like rage, sometimes homicidal rage. I only know that as a woman in a world of men, right? I've never killed anybody, never would, right? But to really not lose my temper, I have to know my temper. I have to know what it's about and know how to work with it. And to do that, I have to accept that it's there. It's a practice of self-acceptance, right? So and I'm just going to say in counseling, a way to, if you're wanting to know more about it, because I can't teach it all right here, there's a thing called internal family systems. There's an IFS, internal family systems workbook by a guy named Richard Schwartz. Internal family systems is the clunky clinical way that counseling is saying, listen in to your inner landscape. They refer to it as parts. Listen to your parts. And it's saying there are no bad parts. So it's an old school thing in psychology to say that all behavior is purposeful. All parts are purposeful. My perfectionist part is trying to protect me, right? If I get it all right, then nobody's ever gonna get mad at me. It doesn't work because there's no such thing as getting it all right. But if I can start actually understanding why my perfectionist is doing this, right? And if I can actually have some patience or some care, like if you had a little kid saying to you, if I don't get it right, everybody's gonna get mad at me and hate me. You're not gonna be like, that's perfectionism, cut it out. Right? You're probably going to be a little bit more like, oh, honey, that's not true. And anybody who doesn't like you, kick them in the butt. Don't tell children to kick people. Right? But it's a really different kind of response. So learning how to have this patient, kind, open, curious response, those are all words that come from mindfulness, right? But to have that towards whatever experience you're having, because that's what meditation is, whatever experience you're having. You're not having no thoughts about it. You're not having no feelings about it. What you're doing is you're signing up without needing to get off the ride. You're letting yourself have the experience while being kind of like I was on the road, like, where does the urge to pass come from? Right? I'm just learning what this is, whether it's restless, whether it's fear, whether it's anger, whether it's grief or sorrow. This is really great work to do with joy. Don't just do it with the big heavies. Right. But so internal family systems is a great way to get into that. I want to go back. I realized I skipped on the slide, the third thing where I said, be a good neighbor. If you want another way to, I think all of you probably do this, but another great way to make deep connections with the land is to create habitat. Create habitat. And if anybody wants to know about creating habitat, like I've got a list over there, put your name down and your email, come see my garden. It's my favorite thing to do, create habitat. So, all right, wrapping up. Making space for us to, I mentioned earlier the book Sand Talk by Tyson Yunkaporta. I highly recommend listening to this on Spotify or some audio version because he's the one speaking it. And it's so much more valuable to get it in his voice because then you get all the inflection and you get to know more about how he's thinking about it. It's more personal, right? But so us two, I'm not going to try to translate that. It is his English translation of a pronoun that doesn't exist in English, but does exist in his language. But it's a way of breaking down the separation between I and you. So instead of saying I or me, getting really individualistic again, but also creating distinction. This is a nod, a way of being like, there's a we, and it's not the royal we. There's a collective space that's affecting, and for where he's coming from, it's not just human people. All species are people. I did a lot of work on the Black Mesa Reservation with the Black Mesa Indigenous support who are helping the Navajo who are facing forced relocation from their lands by the BIA and Peabody Coal. And there's a lot of folks who they're not the Navajo, they're Dene. And yeah, they call themselves Dene, but what they don't usually know is that the word Dene, it means person. And some people will say that, oh, Dene means person. I was like, but you can have dog Dene, cactus Dene, sky Dene, cloud Dene. There's all kinds of Dene, all kinds of people. And that is a thing that exists as a marker in all Indigenous languages and would have existed in our Indigenous languages, if we still had them, right? That's a thing that's there. In fact, Robin Wall-Kimmerer, when she's doing the incredible gracious act of allowing English to borrow a part of Potawatomi to stop saying it, right? So, because we refer to something as it, she's like, you wouldn't call your grandmother it, but if you're looking at, there's like the big, beautiful white oak tree that's on Lathrop, right? Say it's beautiful. There's a kind of disrespect in it. So she suggests a shortened word that is ki, ki. But when you make things plural in her language, you add an in, right? Kin, right? She's like, oh, look, our kin are flying home, right? It's a beautiful thing, but the way that we speak really matters. And it's another way of making space, right? It's another way of deepening a relationship and actually stewarding community beyond just human community. So if you want a book about that one, David Abram, The Spell of the Sensuous. He also wrote a book called Becoming Animal. Don't read Becoming Animal if you didn't read The Spell of the Sensuous. It won't make any sense. He's very heady. But he talks about problems with verb-to-be languages. He talks about non-verb-to-be languages all over the world. He talks about these things and gives great ways of playing with it. So instead of saying, like in English, we have to do subject, verb, object, right? So we're always objectifying. I looked out the window at the sky. I looked at the sky, right? And it's a challenge. I used to give this to my students at MU in the opening or senses class. The sky called my attention. The tree called me to her, right? So the earth wanted me to lay down, right? But to begin really upending, and we can do it in our daily language, to stop saying it and to start actually connecting with the idea that this world is with us and connecting with us. And this world is alive in a way that's not just scenery, right? So deepening relationships with community, expanding the definition of us too, to not only belong to humans, but what I also want to talk about with this is human to human community. So what is firing in me fires into the world. And I wrote, why swap clowns for cops? Because I wanted to talk about a thing to do with fire. And this also has to do with angry driving. I read a Get Pocket article about an experiment that took place in the country of Colombia. And this actually, it's no longer going on, but it was wildly successful. And it was actually quite some time ago. They tell you 3/4 of the way through the article. But what the mayor did was he was like, all right, we're going to fire some traffic cops over here because we're having so many accidents, deaths, violations, so on and so forth. We're going to fire these traffic cops. And I'm not kidding. We're going to hire some mimes. And we're going to put a troop of 3 or 4 mimes on these corners that the traffic cops were manning, right? And the mimes aren't going to speak because they're mimes, right? But what the mimes did, like instead of doing it the cop way, which is I'm going to write you a ticket, I'm going to chase you down, it's a punitive measure, it's kind of scary, you have a predatory authority, right? What the mimes are doing is like anytime they saw somebody like blow a light, they're just like, right? And anytime they see somebody doing something, like if they're jaywalking, they'll follow and be like, how do you all feel laughing? See what that just did, right? That changes it so much. It moves the anger. It's still, humor is a kind of fire, right? It's a kind of fire, but it's transforming what would be anger into something else, right? And so what was really fantastic about this, they ended up firing 400 police officers and replacing them with mimes because the traffic violations and deaths were cut more than in half, right? And it's a really amazing thing. And we might not all want to dress up as mimes, but I will say something that I try to remember to do because I don't want to be an angry driver, and is that when somebody happens to forget to notice the light has turned green in front of me, right? First, I wait a few beats. I don't want to be rude, right? But when I hit my horn, I try to make sure that what my face is doing is some version of, or because we all do it, right? As soon as somebody honks, we're straight for the rear view, like, who's that guy? And I've had like the funniest moments. There was this big old boat, this like older fellow, and he looks back, and when he sees me being like, he just died laughing, and I can't hear him, but he's waving at me, and I'm like, oh, and we're at the light for 5 more seconds. But it was such a better interaction to drive away because instead of him driving away feeling like he just got yelled at, and me driving away feeling like I got in trouble just for trying to remind somebody to go, we're both in a totally different communal space. We're celebrating our common humanity, and every single one of us messes up driving somewhere. So being able to get into the common unity, the community, and thinking about what is firing in me is also firing into the world, right? The reason I put the word moral elevation there is because moral elevation is just the term that says that you don't have to be the recipient of good juju in order to actually get that oxytocin boost from it. Unfortunately, this is something commercials use a lot, right? Where they make us cry, you see people connecting, and it can give you a boost, right? But you don't even have to be the one doing it to experience it, which means that if you're doing something really warm like that, others witnessing it are going to be elevated by it, right? And moral elevation is a lot like the ripple effect. Our acts of cooperation is what they're sometimes called, tend to ripple between like 2 to 3 interactions further out. So if I'm super sweet and nice to the cashier, like my partner James here is always trying to make super fun friends with the cashiers everywhere we go. He's like, how was your day? How are things going? He'll laugh at all their jokes or he'll make jokes, right? And it tends like, we end up with friends at stores. They're like, we come in and they're like, oh, I haven't seen you in a while, blah, blah, right? It makes a connection. But what's super cool about that behavior is that it means that that person, if they're smiling by the time we walk away, they're likely to actually be smiling for their next 2 to 3 interactions, which means then that's likely to also reverberate through other people. So there's a place where, like, again, healthy relation heals, right? And so it's wonderful, co-regulate with nature. And it's really important to begin getting into our sticky, stinky emotions that we wish we didn't have and learning to give them a home, learning to give them a seat at the table with a whole lot of empathy and kindness, but also like taking on the order of like, while the ship is going down, can we be kind to each other? And this is the part where I always say I'm a really terrible therapist. Like I have clients who come and I'm like, I know you're here to feel better. I'm here to help you feel bad, right? And I know I just said while the ship is going down. Something that I do for my clients a lot is I draw a picture of the compost cycle, draw a circle, draw a line through it. I draw a cute little flower, right? A flower makes some kind of fruit, not really kind of how flowers work, but still, right? And at some point that dies, it's fall. And then everything has to go into the underworld and be torn apart, right? And I put an X at the beginning of the underworld that says, you're here. We're in the 6th major mass extinction. This is not an easy time to be alive, right? And again, going back to old mythology, reading about Ragnarok, right? Or if you look into Hinduism, if you don't know the yugas of Hinduism, they're super cool, but they're saying and have been saying for a very, 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 very long time that this is the Kali Yuga. Kali, right? The god of the destructive Ma. We're in that yuga. The good news is it's the shortest yuga. The bad news is it's 400,000 years long and it started 3,000 years ago. So there's a way that, the Hindus are like, hey, settle up, right? But there's this really wonderful quote, which I'm going to paraphrase, I'm not going to butcher it, but it basically says, if you don't have a critique of the Kali Yuga, if you don't have a critique of what is going on in our times, of the terrible destruction of nature, the terrible divisions between each other, the destruction of each other, all of the war, the stealing, the exploitation, all of it, then you're culturally irrelevant. You're socially irrelevant. But the next part of it is if all you have is a critique, then you're spiritually irrelevant. Right. And it's a way of saying, I want to say, going back to etymology, spirit doesn't have to mean that you got to get religion. You don't have to become a Hindu. Right. Spirit, the word respirar means to breathe in Spanish. And there are over 40 known languages across the world. And I suspect there are quite a few more where the words for spirit and the words for mind are the same words. And they're also the words for wind. It's coming right back into, we're not a little locked individual self. We're being intersected all the time by the air that we breathe, which brings us consciousness and brings us information and ideas that we didn't have before. The same as the energy sort of just moving around a room can bring us information we didn't have before. And so it doesn't mean you have to get spiritual, but it is to say you got to get connected. You got to get into the interconnectedness of it to be alive in the Kali Yuga. So this is my last slide. Misery loves company. I know that sounds like a really depressing way to end, right? And it's very true that like really miserable people oftentimes have a tendency to drag people down. But what I actually mean by this is that when we're struggling, we need company. We're social animals, right? And anything struggling needs company. Like people are so good with this with pets. When they have a scared animal, they know how to move towards that. Right. And it's easier with a pet who's sick or a pet who's dying than it is with a human who is sick or a human who is dying, because you already know that the only thing you can really do for your pet is be there. Right. It's a harder thing to be there. And I'm not going to go so far as to say the planet is dying, but a whole lot of the planet is dying. Right. Well, I didn't know that was actually going to go off.
An hour.
So. And it's so a whole lot of the planet is dying. And it's just to say that we have a role within that. If we're in the Kali Yuga, if we're in the underworld, then we're in a space of hospicing. Hospicing is incredibly powerful work. And I'm going to say, like, working with trauma, the main things that are often being worked with, other than the great disconnect, the things I've been talking about in this talk, is we're always talking death and we're always talking death. We're not being avoidant of those issues. And it's amazing how connective and how healing having a relationship with death is. It's healing to have a relationship with death. Pima Chodron had a class one of my clients told me about where she's like, go out and watch death, right? So she had a bunch of students walking around checking in on decomposing roadkill every day, right? Or watching like the leaves in their yard through entire seasons, right? Just watching the way things break down and decompose, because the idea is you have to actually understand the cycle. Things have to die. There is a cycle. That's part of why it's in stories. And so I feel like there's a lot of hope within that, you know, but there's also this idea that we're not really here to be comfortable. And we're not really here like to control everybody for the sake of our own survival. When we say things are unsustainable, it means it's not gonna last. It's done, right? And so it's like, well, what do we do when it's done, right? I didn't like the movie Titanic all that much. It's kind of silly, but I love the band still playing, you know? Everybody knows that's noble. That's an amazing thing to do, to accept this ship is going down. No one's letting me on that lifeboat. But what can I do? A gift of music connected with my people, right? So those are the things that I encourage people to do for climate anxiety. And that's basically my talk. Thank you. So yes. So there was This Book on Fire is the name of the podcast. Yes, it's a funny name. This Book on Fire is the name of the podcast, and the episode, it's Caliban, like Caliban from Shakespeare, Caliban and the Witch. And there's a free PDF on their website of Caliban and the Witch. You don't have to buy it. Federici, she wants you to read it. So Sylvia Federici. I will say it's a very heady book if you don't have anything else on for the summer. I found myself, I do a lot of history, but I found myself having to look up a whole bunch of stuff as I was reading. I was like, I've never heard of those people. I don't know about that town. She's the author of Caliban and the Witch And the podcast that unpacks that book is called This Book on Fire. Why read? Yes.
So on that topic, you did mention lots of patients. And I wonder if we've been communicating over. Would you mind terribly?
I'll put them together.
List?
Yeah, yeah.
And then I will get.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, I'll even add some to it.
So, I don't know about you, but, I have a really hard time opening my refrigerator and seeing food, knowing that there are so many starving people. And, you know, like I deal with that pain all the time. And yes, I totally agree about, yes, going into nature, it definitely makes me feel better. Yes, connecting with other like-minded people. We are together in this thing. But I wonder about the effects of all of this pain and suffering on ourselves. And I don't know, do you ever feel that way? And how do you deal
Yeah. Yes.
with
I feel that way around a lot of things. When I was at the conference where Abram was speaking, they actually did a grief ritual, and one of the altars for the grief ritual was for the species that have disappeared. And that one just broke me. Like it's so heart-wrenching. And I'm gonna say, like, all the things that I'm talking about within this talk, the thing that's so hard about being alive right now is that there's no putting it back in the bottle. Like, and I feel like I very much come from an orientation, and I've learned this from so many other teachers, and most of them are Indigenous folk, right? And I want to be like, I feel like I want to slap a disclaimer there to be like, and don't think that means lesser. Don't play hierarchy of domination because it's not science, right? There's so much wisdom there. There's more wisdom there, and there's a lot of substance. And like most of us, my understanding is that we have to be in a grief space. We can't bypass it. We're not able to grieve all the time. Something I almost put into this talk, but I was worried I was going to take too long. You've heard the phrase hallelujah anyway, right? And so I heard, like, I call it, you're not going to get my goat. But hallelujah anyway. I heard a fellow introduce it. He's an African American fellow. And he was very courteously kind of saying, welcome to the club of knowing what it's like to know that you could die any day. Welcome to the club of knowing that your needs actually don't matter to your government at all, right? He's like, Black people in this country, we've always known life's not fair. We've always known that things are so dangerous, right? And he's like, but like through slavery all the way up, he's like, every Sunday you see us singing. You're never gonna take away our connection to our deep, deep worth as seen through the eyes of what we find holy, the way we find ourselves holy. Right? Hallelujah anyway. Right. And so and that is also a thing that exists. When I say Indigenous, I don't mean like First Nation Turtle Island only. I mean across all continents, right? There's a really wonderful book. They might have it here called The Crossing by this author, Jan Yours. I'll put this one in the thing too. I do a lot of reading. But so Yours was a fellow when he was about 8 years old. So he was growing up before World War II. He had British parents, but they would go to France for the summer. And the Roma, the Gypsies, were still actually doing their caravans back then, right? And so he started playing with these young Roma boys, and he kind of just got, in a way that is very unusual, brought into that group. He got sort of adopted by one of the fathers. And he's so funny in the book. He's like, I don't know why, for whatever reason, I think my parents understood that this was really important. And they let him go with the Gypsies for half a year, like every year, through into his adulthood. But so he'd spend part of the year with them in the winter, and he would spend the springs and the summer coming into fall with the Gypsies. And he describes a thing, and this book is really hard. It's full of grief. That's why it's good to read, right? But there's a point where he's talking about it's occupied France, right? And the Gypsies were still actually doing a little better than the French people, than the villagers, because they'd always been living off the land. They weren't connected to the food systems being obstructed by embargo, right? And they're outside of this French town that the Germans are occupying, and the French folks who have nothing to do with embargo, right? So they're pretty stuck, and the German soldiers are drinking at the bar. And they're getting angrier and angrier and angrier. And eventually they, as a group, come and storm the gypsy camp, right? And fortunately, there was a dog barking. They heard them coming. So all of the people hid. All the men hid, right? The group gets there, they shoot one dog in the face, and then they steal all the horses. And I really cannot steal all the horses. I cannot overstate how important and how family horses are in that culture. It's worse than stealing your pet dog. It's kind of like stealing your children. They stole the horses. And as soon as the drunken horse thieves were gone, the entire camp exploded into celebration. Music, song, food, lighting the fires. And yours, who's not a gypsy, right? He's kind of adopted in, is looking at his father and being like, why? And his dad, he says it so much more eloquently than I could. Like what he says is so wise, but basically the gist of it was just like, you expect things to be fair. We know that they're not. We know nothing is handed to us. We know that death can come at any moment. We don't live with this expectation of comfort, right? Says what just happened was a win. What just happened was a miracle. No one died. No one died. And so they were ecstatic, right? Hallelujah anyway, right? To be able to live, and that thing that we're building when we begin to listen into our bodies, when we learn how to be with what is happening without it tilting us into trauma or panic, right? That's called capacity. What that man is describing is a capacity. It's a capacity to live through really hard times and not lose your joy, right? Like I've recently got to watch several talks with folks in Palestine, with Palestinians, right? And I so deeply appreciate every single person is just like, we're still having weddings. We're still, of course, we're having way more funerals. Of course, things are awful, right? But also, if you really think that you need to come help us, you've already missed the point because you're in as much danger as we are. And we're not a charity case. We know how to do this better than you, America, right? We're still having weddings. We're not depressed, right? So, and that might be a bit of an oversimplification, but you can see it, like there's so much joy. You're not going to get my goat, right? And so that is what capacity is. And we're in my opinion, it's a different kind of danger, but it's just as steep. The one that has disconnected us completely from our ability to have that kind of capacity, while thinking that while leaving us only with tools that are rational. So we're saying to ourselves, don't feel like that, don't want to feel like that, that doesn't feel good, don't do that, right? Like this is the worst intervention in the world. You're a psychologist, right? How often did stop that work as an intervention, right? It just doesn't. And our rational mind can't actually control what our body brain is doing. So our body brain has 11 million bits of information that it's processing a second. Your conscious mind, the thing you call you, that I call me, right? Or we might call us too if we get on board, right? Is processing 50 of those. And that's when you're doing something hard. If you're just chilling, it's even less. 11 million to 50, right? I heard a neuroscientist on an NPR talk, like he's giving a whole talk on cognition and mindfulness and whatever. And the interviewer asked this question. I don't remember what it was, but it was like, it was about the body. And he was like, oh, no. The conscious mind doesn't hold a candle to the body. I wanted to pull over and applaud. I was like, thank you so much for saying it. But yeah, our body, listening into the body, listening in different ways that aren't rational, making space for what is actually emotion is how we develop capacity. So if that helps. Yeah. Any other questions?
I would love to ask you more questions, but we have to get out of the library. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
We wish they would not close it anymore. The previous close used to be. Yeah.
I'm done. It's one of my favorites. Yeah. I think I